thank you so much to everyone for joining today. It's great to see such a huge interest in this issue. So I'm Mary Hayes, and I'm the project lead for Two Into You, which is a project by Women's Aid. So today we're going to be covering a couple of things that were set out in the agenda for today. So the common warning signs of abuse, what intimate relationship abuse is, supporting and listening to a young person that you're working with, and prevalence of abuse in Ireland, as well as a few other pieces as well. So just a reminder, if anyone is following along on Twitter today, to use the hashtag #2IntoYou, and if you could possibly as well to tag @2IntoYou and @women's_aid. If you have any questions throughout, you can pop them in the Q&A box. And I'll try to get to as many of them as I can at the end. We also have Denise helping out with the technical side of things. So if there are any issues, you might see her popping up on screen. And we also have Catherine, who is providing ISL today. So thank you, Catherine, for being here. So just first off, I just wanted to give a quick trigger warning. So some of the topics covered today can be upsetting or difficult to listen to. So I'll be mentioning physical, emotional, sexual abuse and violence and domestic violence. And if anyone needs to leave at any point, please feel free to do so, and you can contact the Women's Aid 24-hour national free phone helpline on 1800 341 900, or you can chat to the Women's Aid helpline team through our instant messaging service at 2intoyou.ie. So for anyone who isn't aware of who Women's Aid are, so Women's Aid is the leading national organisation that's been working in Ireland to stop domestic violence against women and children since 1974. So we work to make women and children safe from domestic violence, to offer support, provide hope to women affected by abuse, and we also work for justice and social change. So over the course of 40 years, the organisation has really built up a huge body of experience and expertise on the issue. And it really enables us to best support women and children and to share this knowledge with other agencies who respond to women experiencing domestic violence. And all of our direct services are really informed by the work that we do with survivors. So how do we do this? So we operate the National Free Phone Helpline on 1800 341 900. It operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it provides support and information to callers experiencing abuse from a partner or intimate partner. So the Women's Aid Helpline is the only free national domestic violence helpline with specialised trained staff who are fully accredited by the Helplines Association. And we also have a telephone interpretation service that covers 170 languages. We also offer a court accompaniment service, which provides advocacy and support specific to women seeking legal redress regarding violence by a current or former husband or partner. We offer a Dublin-based one-to-one support service and drop-in service at Dolphin House. We refer women to local domestic violence refuges and support services throughout the country. And in addition to our direct services, we also act for justice and social change by engaging in policy, representation and communications, and we campaign at a national level as well. We also provide extensive information and statistics on domestic violence, and we provide specialised training on responding to domestic violence. And we hope that by increasing a public understanding and awareness of all forms of violence against women, including domestic violence, that we can really improve responses to and increase those protections for women and children affected by violence and abuse. So then what is 2Into? So 2Into began in 2011, and it's aimed at young people, in particular young women aged 18 to 25. So on the Women's Aid Helpline and in our drop-in services, we were hearing from an increasing amount of young women experiencing abuse. And we know from our research as well that many young women in particular are subjected to abuse by a current or former partner outside of that traditional domestic setting. So this is why we set up 2Into. It's a specific support service from Women's Aid developed for young people subjected to intimate relationship abuse. The project involves a number of things. So it involves awareness campaigns to increase awareness of the supports available. We have a dedicated website, 2into.ie, which has a number of supports, resources, and information. We also run our instant messaging support service at 2into.ie, and that's operated by the Women's Aid Helpline team. And the campaign also aims to help young people learn about intimate relationship abuse, the signs of abuse, the difference between healthy versus unhealthy relationships, the legal protections available, and teaches them about digital safety and online safety, as well as image-based sexual abuse. And while the service is predominantly for 18 to 25s, much of the information that's on the website is also relevant to those under 18, because from our research, we know that many young women who are subjected to abuse, that abuse starts under the age of 18. And we also recognise that while both men and women can be subjected to intimate relationship abuse, and abuse can also happen in LGBTQ plus relationships, that women and girls in intimate relationships with men are affected disproportionately by violence and abuse. And this is really a reflection of, the historically unequal power relations that we see between men and women. And it reflects a sexist society that teaches young men that an entitlement to power and privilege should really be the core of their sense of masculinity. And this understanding of what it means to be a man can really bleed into all aspects of young men's lives, including their intimate relationships with women. And this would indicate, why we see a much higher prevalence of abuse by men against women. We also know that while all women are vulnerable to gender-based violence, so experiencing the shame, silence, and secrecy in the face of violence and coercive control, that women who already face prejudice, discrimination, abuse, and marginalization in their day-to-day lives, so due to, for example, their race, disability, sexuality, or gender identity, that they can be further unprotected from gender-based violence and face more complex barriers in seeking support. So we really can't ignore the intersectional experiences of young people if we're to truly tackle this issue head on and meet the needs of those who are most at risk of this type of abuse. So before I get into the, I suppose, complexities of abuse, I just wanted to give a snapshot of the 2into.ie website. So this is the current website, and it has lots of different resources and information available for young people. So we have our healthy relationship quiz, which is very popular. So it's 10 short questions, and it can help young people to start thinking about their relationship and whether or not it feels healthy or not. We also have stories from survivors of abuse. We have our common warning signs of abuse, as well as information on legal protections available, online safety, so what to do if your images have been shared, how to block people on social media, things like that. And we're also currently redeveloping the site, so it's going to have even more resources and tools, so keep an eye out for that later on in the year. And then in terms of the instant messaging support service, so it's a really valuable resource for young people. And the chat service, it's not just for somebody worried about their own relationship. So if a young person is worried that their friend might be experiencing abuse, they can also chat to the helpline team on that messaging service for advice and support. And the service is completely free and confidential. So it's non-judgmental, and really what it does is it provides a space for young people to talk through what's going on in their relationship. It's operated by trained volunteers who have a really strong understanding of the dynamics of abuse, and it can really help a young person feel less alone, and meet them where they're at if they're going through a difficult situation. So then when we're talking about this, why do we use the term intimate relationship abuse? So why don't we say domestic violence? So from our research and conversations with young people, the term domestic violence didn't really resonate with them. They told us that it felt like something that refers to older, say, married women who may have children and who might be living with an abusive partner over many years. You may have also heard of the term dating abuse, but we found that this was quite an Americanized term, and that young people in Ireland didn't really align with it. So it didn't accurately represent how young people in Ireland define their relationships. So instead, we use the term intimate relationship abuse. So we use this term to better describe the life stage and experience of young people, in particular young women, aged 18 to 25, who might suffer abuse outside of a traditional domestic setting. So really what it tells us is that you don't have to be living with your partner for them to act abusively towards you. And we know that abuse can also happen in casual and even short-term relationships. So for many young people, the abuse can take place in their first relationship, so they have nothing to compare it to, and this can really set the context for how they're treated in relationships as they get older. So I want to read the definition just to give us a good understanding of what is involved in this type of abuse. So intimate relationship abuse is a pattern of abusive behavior used by someone who is or wishes to be in an intimate or dating relationship with another person to control that person. It can take a wide range of forms, including physical, emotional, sexual abuse, or threat of same. It may also include physical violence, emotional abuse, coercion, destruction of property, isolation from friends, family, threats to others, including children, stalking, control over access to personal items, money, food, transport, or telecommunications. So there are a couple of key pieces here. So firstly, abuse is a pattern of behaviors used to gain or maintain power and control over a partner. So everyone has arguments, and everyone disagrees with their partner, family members and others close to them from time to time. But if this begins to form a consistent pattern with your partner and you begin to feel afraid of your partner, then this is a sign for abuse. Secondly, it refers to someone who wishes to be in an intimate relationship with someone. So say if the relationship has ended, but their partner is harassing them to get back together. So they might turn up at their work unannounced, they might stalk them online or try to contact them through family and friends. Another one we hear as well is they might threaten to share intimate images of them to try and coerce them to getting back together with their partner. Abuse can also happen pre-relationship. So for example, grooming, where someone builds a relationship, trust, and emotional connection with a child or young person so they can manipulate, exploit, and abuse them. And for many young people, abuse can feel like a really big word, and toxic behaviors are brushed off as normal or part and parcel of relationships. But no matter how long or serious the relationship is, or whatever stage it's at, abuse is common, it is incredibly serious, and it's a crime. And for young people starting to make their way in the world, the impacts of abuse can be really severe and have a very long-lasting and life-changing consequences. And I'll come back to the impacts a little bit later on. So often when we think of, domestic abuse, partner violence, intimate relationship abuse, generally our minds go straight to physical abuse. But abuse doesn't take just one form. It can happen in many ways, including physical, emotional, sexual abuse, or the threat of physical or sexual abuse. And actually, from our research, we know that the majority of young women are subjected to emotional abuse. And sustained emotional abuse can have even more serious and long lasting impacts than physical abuse. Sexual abuse is also very common. So we know that it's harder for a woman who is being abused, manipulated, and coerced by their partner to consent and negotiate a free and equal sexual relationship with that partner. Online abuse is very common. And online abuse is really a tool for carrying out other forms of abuse. So, for example, their partner might track their movements on a location tracker on Snapchat. Their partner might invade their safe space online by incessantly liking and commenting on all of her photos and videos. They might screenshot intimate images. They might demand to know all their passwords or demand to look through their phone. And this is a real invasion of privacy and not an indication of a trusting and equal relationship. Economic abuse is also when someone uses access to money or to other resources as a means of controlling their partner. So it's a tactic that abusers use to gain power and dominance over their partner, and it's designed to create a situation of complete financial dependence on their partner, making it often very hard to leave. Coercive control then can include some or all forms of abuse. So it's an act or pattern of acts of assault, threats, humiliation, and intimidation that's used to harm, punish, or frighten their partner. So someone will use this behavior to make their partner, completely dependent on them and incredibly isolated and afraid. And it can happen in many ways. So, for example, they make it hard for you to see your family and friends or complain about spending time with them. They might constantly nag you and put you down. They might guilt you into doing things sexually you don't want to do. Or they might, make you feel on edge from their mood swings or how they will react to everything. So you change how you act or do things to keep the peace. So by doing these things, they are completely depriving their partner of any sense of independence and trapping them by regulating their everyday decisions, movements, and actions. And coercive control really creates invisible chains and a sense of fear that can really creep into all aspects of your life. It can deprive you of your freedom and your independence, and it can reduce your ability for action, which can make it really hard to leave an abusive relationship. The threat of physical and sexual abuse is also a big part of how abuse happens. So say your partner threatens to hurt you if you don't agree with their demands, or they threaten to hurt themselves or you if you break up with them. So these are threats of abuse, and these are also a criminal offence. And this is really central to how abusers keep their victims locked in an abusive relationship. And I'll explain this further in a little bit. So firstly, I'm just going to talk about the prevalence of abuse in Ireland. We've carried out 2 nationally representative studies in 2020 and 2021 on young men and young women aged 18 to 25. And what we found is that abuse is a heavily gendered phenomenon. So we found that 1 in 5 young women have been subjected to intimate relationship abuse compared to 1 in 11 young men. And in all cases where women were subjected to intimate relationship abuse, this abuse was perpetrated by a current or former intimate male partner. And this reflects international evidence that tells us that while men can experience abuse, and abuse can also happen in LGBT relationships, that women and girls are affected disproportionately. Worryingly as well, over half of the young women who are subjected to abuse told us that the abuse started before they turned 18, so they would be considered minors. And also 1 in 3 young women never spoke to anyone about the abuse. And we know that the earlier a victim, a survivor, can be supported, the better, because the more established the relationship becomes, the more difficult it can be for them to safely leave and stay safe after ending the relationship. So then, of the 1 in 5 young women who were abused, we found that the abuse they were subjected to was both insidious and all-encompassing. So of those young women, 9 in 10 were emotionally abused. And emotional abuse was really seen as something that was easy to perpetrate, but difficult to recognize and identify. And emotional abuse can include being put down, being constantly criticized, your partner threatening to hurt you, destroying your property, you're throwing your phone across the room, destroying clothes, calling you slurs or curse words, and really not allowing you independence or never leaving you on your own. And 3 in 4 were sexually coerced. So over half were sexually assaulted and 27% were raped. And we often forget that, if you're in a relationship with someone, consent is still important. So no one has the right to force you or guilt you into sex, especially your partner. And this can be a common red flag for abuse. Also, the age of consent in Ireland is 17. So if your partner doesn't respect this, it can also be a red flag for abuse. In terms of physical violence, then 1 in 2 were threatened with physical violence. 1 in 2 also experienced less severe physical violence. So, for example, slapping or shoving. And 1 in 3 had experienced more severe forms of physical abuse, including punching, choking, and burning. 1 in 2 had been targeted with online abuse, which was described as really draining and exhausting. And you can see some examples in the box of how online abuse can manifest. So over half, 55%, were stalked or harassed online. And online abuse can include, your partner liking and commenting on all of your photos and videos, knowing all of your social media passwords, or demanding to look through your phone, monitoring your movements with a location tracker, and sharing or threatening to share intimate images or videos of you, which is now illegal under COCO's law. And finally, then, almost 1 in 3 were subjected to economic abuse. So in terms then of the impact of abuse, so 84% said that the abuse had a severe impact. And no one said that abuse did not have an impact on them. So we know that, abuse can have a really severe impact on young people, including loss of self-esteem, anxiety, depression, withdrawal from friends and family, so that real isolation, giving up work or college, which can have an effect on, young women's work prospects and economic independence. Suicidal thoughts or attempting suicide, needing treatment for physical injuries, and also living in fear. And the ultimate cost in some extreme cases then can be fatal. And the impact of abuse can really be severe and long-lasting, and also life-changing for young women, regardless of the age that it occurred. And this can be the case even in relationships which to older people might seem relatively short in duration. And also the impact won't be the same for everyone. So for example, for a traveler woman who leaves an abusive relationship, she might face the loss of community or potential homelessness because of a lack of appropriate accommodation. For someone who is trans, non-binary, or queer, an abusive partner might threaten to out them at work. So this could put their employment and economic independence at risk. For someone who is disabled, the physical implications of physical abuse could be even worse because of comorbidities. So abuse can really negatively impact someone's ability to manage their primary physical disability, and it can lead to really debilitating secondary conditions. For a young Black woman who needs to seek formal support, she might also fear engaging with authorities as well. So those are just some of the examples on how abuse can impact people differently. So then how do we spot abuse in the young people that you work with? So in order to be able to spot abuse, we need to understand how abuse happens. So abuse happens when someone uses abusive behaviors and tactics to gain or maintain power and control over their partner. So tactics of abuse like emotional abuse, coercive control, they're used to break down equality in the relationship in order to make their partners feel less valuable and undeserving of respect. So this is the power and control wheel. And the wheel shows 8 different tactics that people use to achieve dominance, power, and control over their partner. And they use these to keep their partner in the relationship. So the inside of the wheel is made up of subtle, continuous behaviors that are used over time by a person to get their partner to comply with their needs. Otherwise, they face the consequences we see on the outside ring, so physical and sexual violence. So for example, they will make their partner afraid with looks, gestures, and actions. So for someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, you know, this might look like their partner signing very close to their face when they're angry. They might emotionally manipulate their partner, making them think that they're going crazy or that the abuse is normal and that they deserve it. They might threaten to hurt themselves if their partner leaves the relationship. They might isolate their partner from family and friends and make the world very small. So for example, for a woman who is, you know, immigrated here, she might already be very isolated and not have family supports in Ireland, so that isolation feels even bigger. You know, they might convince their partner that no one else will love them and that no one cares about them. They'll constantly criticize and put their partner down by telling them how to dress or criticizing how they look. So for example, for say a trans woman, their partner might belittle, you know, their gender identity or use incorrect pronouns to really put them down and wear down their sense of self. Their partner might demand that they send intimate images or nudes and threaten to share these if their partner steps out of line. They might blame their partner for their mood swings and temper. And they'll really take advantage of the barriers that marginalized women face. So for example, you know, if a woman's first language isn't English, her partner might exclude her from important conversations, making that isolation even worse. So then if we look at the outer ring, we see physical and sexual violence. So in abusive relationships, the threat of physical and sexual violence is always present. So their partner may have never harmed them physically or sexually, but maybe they have, you know, punched a wall in frustration. Maybe they get into fights easily on nights out. Maybe they gave their partner the silent treatment because they didn't have sex with them. So all of these things show that they are capable of physical and sexual violence, which can be really frightening and make a young person feel very afraid and alone. So this threat and fear of physical and sexual violence makes these other more subtle methods found in the inner ring really fly under the radar more easily. So that young person is coerced and manipulated and then subjected to the tactics in the inner ring to avoid that physical and sexual violence that we see on the outer ring. And really, abusive partners can prey on vulnerabilities. So they usually target those who are kind and giving. You know, young people may not have had other relationships, intimate relationships to compare a potential or actually abusive relationship with. And as young women and young people start to make their way in the world, a controlling or violent partner can be a huge setback at the beginning of their adult life. So it's important that we learn how to recognize abuse and offer support where we can. And I know that this can be quite complex, but really when we understand power and control as the basis for all abusive behaviors, we can spot abuse more easily, no matter how the abuse manifests. So how does abuse actually start? So what starts out as romantic can turn into abusive behaviors later on, and these are known as red flags for abuse. So just some examples then are love bombing. So love bombing is a manipulation tactic where, you know, a partner will lavish you with excessive time, attention, or gifts. And it normally happens very early on in the relationship. So they might say things like, you're my soulmate, you're perfect for me, my life would be nothing without you. They'll bombard you with texts and calls and DMs. But these loving acts can really be used as a smokescreen for abusive behavior or a reason to validate harsh treatment later on. So they might say things like, I bought you this, so you have to do what I say, or I was so nice to you today, you better have sex with me later. Another thing we hear about quite often is gaslighting. So gaslighting is an extremely effective form of emotional abuse. And it causes a survivor to question their own feelings, instincts, and sanity, and really gives the abusive partner a lot of power. So their partner might say things like, you know, you're crazy, that never happened. Are you sure? You tend to have a bad memory, or it's all in your head. So once an abusive partner has broken down the young person's ability to trust their own perceptions and judgment, they're more likely to stay in the abusive relationship. And the abusive partner might also present themselves as the victim, so that the young person actually, you know, feels guilty and then questions their own memory and judgment. And tactics like this can really wear down a person's sense of themselves and trust in their own intuition, which can make it harder for them to really reject or question patterns of abuse later on in the relationship. Another tactic then is called negging, and it's often excused as slagging or banter in dating culture early on. So simply put, negging is when someone insults you and undermines your confidence in an effort to make you more open to their romantic advances. And negging isn't always easy to spot because it will often be disguised amidst, you know, flirtatious banter, making it very hard to know if a boundary has been crossed. So examples of this could include, you know, you're really bright for a blonde, or I don't usually like redheads, but I'll give you a try. And often these can include, you know, racist microaggressions. So I don't usually like black girls, but you're pretty attractive. Or you might also see homophobia threaded throughout. So they might say, oh, you're bisexual, you just haven't met the right guy yet. I'll turn you straight. So the common thread here is that they all contain a compliment and an insult, and something that really instills a moment of doubt in the person on the receiving end. And really, with all of these behaviors, they might not sound serious at the time, but they are really emotionally manipulative and can really set the scene for more abusive behaviors later on. So like I explained earlier, abuse can feel like a really big word to a young person, but it can be really helpful for them to learn what the common warning signs of abuse are so that they can spot red flags early on. And these are available at 2into.ie. And just remember, this isn't an exhaustive list. I always tell people if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. So we can see some examples there. So they tell you how to dress and criticize Is that still working?
Yep.
Oh, great. Thanks, Denise. So they tell you how to dress and criticize your appearance. They demand all of your passwords so they can check your phone. They have a bad temper and you feel afraid to disagree with them. They make you feel guilty if you don't spend all your free time with them. So again, we can see the common thread here of power and control through each red flag. Another way to look at this then is through the lens of what a healthy versus unhealthy relationship looks like. So in a healthy relationship, their partner will make them feel equal. They'll feel listened to. Their partner will respect their need for time alone. They'll support their partner's decisions, whatever they are. So really what we see here is that their partner isn't trying to gain or maintain power and control over their partner in their relationship. In an unhealthy relationship, then their partner, will make them feel afraid. They'll threaten them. They'll stop them from seeing family and friends. They'll get jealous easily and they'll isolate them. So what we're seeing here is that their partner is really trying to gain and maintain that power and control over all aspects of their partner's life. And these are actually bookmarks that we have, 2-in-2 bookmarks. So if anyone is interested in getting one of these bookmarks, you can send me an email and I'd be more than happy to send you out 2-in-2 pack, and it'll have some other resources in it as well. So then in terms of seeking support, so a young person, might feel like something is off in their relationship and they want to talk to someone about it. But we know from our research that young people in particular, and in particular young women, face many barriers in speaking about the issue of abuse and seeking support. So in our research, young women told us that their main concern is around fear of the abusive partner and how seeking help could impact their safety. They also told us that they didn't speak to anyone about the abuse that they'd been subjected to because of fear of not being believed, as well as a lack of recognition that what is happening is actually abuse. And this is important because as adults, we need to remember that abuse can happen even in relationships that we consider short or trivial. They also spoke about shame and fear of being blamed for the abuse. And gendered norms were also seen as a cause for why young women might stay in abusive relationships for longer, because as women, we've been socialized to tolerate these kinds of abusive behaviors in our day-to-day lives. And then for someone who already faces discrimination and marginalization in their day-to-day life, seeking support could be even more difficult for them. So for example, many transgender people face discrimination on a frequent basis. So you can imagine how scary it must be for someone who is trans to open up about relationship abuse, especially when victim blaming and transphobia are very common issues in society. Another example also would be, the belief that disabled people don't desire and are not sexual. And this can be a huge barrier in seeking support for sexual abuse. Also for a migrant woman, if she's in an abusive relationship, she might be worried about seeking support because of her immigration status, or she also might be afraid to report the abuse to authorities as well. So then what do you do if you think a young person you're working with might be experiencing abuse? Excuse me. So I suppose I always say, even if you're unsure that what they're experiencing abuse, it's still worth listening to them and giving them space to talk things through. So for someone who's experiencing abuse, they might have been told, that they're crazy. They might feel like they're making a big deal out of nothing, or that they're being dramatic. They might feel very isolated and afraid. Also, their intuition and their ability to trust their gut and their own judgment might have really been worn down by their partner. So the most important thing that you can do is to listen. So really give them time to talk and don't push them to go into too much detail if they don't want to share. Also, you don't need to talk yourself. This can be difficult for them. So be patient and give them time to work through it themselves. Take care not to blame them. Tell them that they're not alone and that there are many other young people who are in similar situations. You can also acknowledge that it takes strength to talk about what they're going through. It can be really scary to talk about these things because it makes it feel real, and they might feel like they're putting themselves in danger by talking. The second most important thing then is to believe them. So the fear of not being believed, again, is a huge barrier for young people seeking support for abuse. Their partner, will have told them that it's all in their head, and they might have made excuses for abusive behaviors. So for you to say the words, "I believe you," could be really monumental for them. And it could be the first step in them, trusting their gut and regaining trust in their intuition, which is really vital for them to prepare to leave the relationship. Then you can tell them it's not their fault. So to tell them what their partner is doing to them is not okay. So, that's even if you're unsure if it's abuse. Again, remember, if it feels wrong, it probably is, and it's worth talking it through. They might have been very isolated from other supports, like, their friends, their family, or feel like they can't talk to them about it. So the contact they make with you could really be the contact that counts. And as well, tell them that, no matter what their partner says, no one deserves to be manipulated, threatened, or criticized 24/7. Nothing their partner says or does can justify their partner's behavior. And really, there are no excuses for treating someone abusively. You can also tell them that you understand that, they're in a frightening and difficult situation, but that they're not alone. It's really important also to meet them where they're at. So support them by encouraging to express their feelings, whatever they are. So they might need time to process what you've discussed. They might even, get defensive, but it's important to allow them to make their own decisions to regain that sense of intuition and independence. Also, don't tell them to leave the relationship if they're not ready to do this. This is their decision, and it's never just as easy as leaving. You can also tell them about 2intoyou.ie. And while the instant messaging support service and free phone helpline is predominantly for those who are aged over 18, the Women's Aid Helpline team will support any caller. So the helpline team can help a young person really understand what's going on for them. They can support them with information, and they can signpost them to a trusted adult or family member or another support service. And if they're aged under 18, also you should follow normal child protection procedures. And just to say as well that managing disclosures can be complex, and there are important safety considerations that need to be taken into account. So while this is a really small taster of what you can do to listen to a young person, I'd also really recommend the formal training that Women's Aid offers on domestic violence and managing disclosures. And you can contact our training team about this. So next, I want to show a very short video of Juliana, who is a survivor of intimate relationship abuse. And she's really a great example of someone who breaks the mold of someone we think of when we think of a survivor of abuse. So Juliana acts as an ambassador for the 2intoyou campaign. And she speaks about her own experience and really bravely uses her voice to raise awareness of the issue. And she really hopes to reach anyone who feels hopeless and needs support. And here she talks a little bit about the importance of every contact counting when seeking support, and how it can make a huge difference and create hope for someone during what can be an incredibly hopeless time.
My name is Juliana, and I'm just going to share a bit about my experience with intimate relationship abuse. So I was only 18 when I got into that relationship, and we never lived together. And even after the relationship, I never would have called it abusive. I think it's because of the stereotype for domestic abuse is maybe middle-aged people who live together and have kids together and are financially locked. I think because of that stereotype, I didn't even realize it was abuse until someone told me it was, because I didn't fit into that stereotype. I was completely isolated, and I believed that this person was all I had because that's what I was convinced of. The best way I could describe the relationship I was in was that I was completely cut off from my friends and family, not by force, but because the person I was with convinced me that no one cared about me, that I was better off without them, my friends, my family. My self-esteem was absolute rock bottom, and it was not until I got out of the relationship that I could look back and realize that none of that was true. But in the moment, it's almost impossible to break up with someone when you're in that state of mind. So when you do start telling people, it's kind of a balance between protecting that person because it's all you have, and also needing help because you're being abused. It was actually a messaging service like the one that Women's Aid have on the 2NT website that someone told me that it was abusive and that this person was breaking the law. And then that kind of snowballed for me into getting proper help. So after that messaging service conversation, I told my mom. I don't think I told any of my friends yet. And I wrote down everything that had ever happened in the relationship that was deemed abusive on an A4 page. I brought it down to the Garda station, and I couldn't even speak. I knew I wouldn't be able to speak, that's why I wrote it down, because I just burst out crying. And the guard said, we'll ring you so you can come down and give a proper statement. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done, going down to that guard station with that piece of paper, because it was, for the first time, it was real. And I think I didn't get a call back, and I rang back a month later, and another guard answered the phone and told me, look, just being honest here, I don't think it's worth your time even making a statement. And this was obviously from a place of, you know, they're trying to be nice and say, like, it's obviously traumatic for you to speak about. It usually doesn't go anywhere, so it's not really worth your time. So that was, you know, my experience with someone, and their reaction wasn't great. It really put me off, one, making a statement and pressing any kind of charges, but also just telling people in general, because the reaction was, well, you know, there's no real point in sharing because it doesn't really go anywhere. But obviously that was just one experience and one person. I've had friends who've had great experiences with the guards. I think it just depends on the person. Now obviously since then I've had lots of very positive reactions, and I didn't let that one negative one put me off, but I'm sure that does happen to a lot of people. I think that's why also it's so important to be able to spot the signs of someone going through an abusive relationship. They might be dropping hints that are subtle, but if you know how to recognize them, you can pick them up. I remember kind of dropping hints to people, kind of injecting it into sentences or conversations, and it would make people uncomfortable and they'd brush over it, but that was the pain inside me screaming to get out and screaming to speak to someone about it, but I didn't know quite how to word it. I think when you're in those relationships, your mindset about yourself and relationships and everything is just so warped, and you almost kind of feel like you're losing your mind. You kind of start to forget what's real, and I know it's really hard to understand and it's really hard to explain, but you're not in your right mind, and it's not just so easy to get up and leave, or, you know, do what you think you should do in that situation, looking in or looking back on it. I think if someone even hints to you that they're in an abusive relationship, no matter what age they are or how serious the relationship is, your reaction will have a knock-on effect for a really long time in that person. I think if they tell you and you have a really good reaction, they might be inspired to tell people close to them, their family. It's likely the first time they're sharing it with someone. Once you start to open up about things, once someone starts to tell people, it's kind of the beginning of the end of the relationship, of them getting out. So I think just listening, even if you have advice or you think what they're choosing to do might not be worth it, like going to the guards or, you know, going public, just listen to them and listen to their story and let them speak and believe them and make them feel believed, because that will have such a huge impact on them in the months and years to come in their healing.
There are a couple of other ways then that you can support young people that you work with or that you come into contact with if you are concerned about intimate relationship abuse. And one of the ways that you can do that is to really encourage allyship amongst all young people. So I suppose encouraging all young people to be active allies against intimate relationship abuse and gender-based violence in all its forms. So this involves a couple of approaches. So from our research, we know that 3 in 5 young people have experienced or know someone who has experienced intimate relationship abuse. And we want to investigate further young people's understanding of intimate relationship abuse and also their attitudes to intervening with a peer or speaking to a peer if they thought they might be experiencing abuse. So we carried out a nationally representative study to look into this, and from the findings we published our Yes, It's Abuse report in February of this year. So we found that 4 in 5 young people believe that those who are subjected to abuse often suffer in silence and don't seek support. And that actually the majority of young people feel a responsibility to intervene if they're concerned a close friend might be experiencing intimate relationship abuse. However, they had a number of concerns that might prevent them from intervening, including, fears around making the situation worse, misreading the signs of abuse, saying the wrong thing, a lack of awareness of how to help. And also 20% of young men and 8% of young women believe that it's not their business to intervene in a relationship where they suspect abuse. But young people told us that if they knew what to say and had the confidence in how to start the conversation, that it would help them approach someone if they were worried about them. For one another, so that if somebody is experiencing abuse, they know that they're not alone and that there is support available for them at 2and2.ie. So from this study, then we developed our Help a Friend tool. So this is available at 2and2.ie, and it helps young people learn how to spot the signs of abuse in others, how to start the conversation with someone they're worried about, how to offer support, and also how to keep themselves safe. And I'd encourage you, the young people that you work with, about this tool so that they can feel prepared should it ever come up for them. Finally, then, I just wanted to include this quote, which really lends to the fact that we all have a part to play, not only in supporting those who are subjected to intimate relationship abuse, but in rejecting social norms and sexist attitudes that contribute to all forms of gender-based violence. So while individual intervention with victims and survivors has its place in violence prevention, it also needs to be supported by opposition to all forms of gender-based violence by communities as a whole. So this means, looking at policies and procedures that you have in your workplace to respond to the needs of survivors, as well as initiatives and efforts with young people to really challenge the social norms and sexist attitudes that enable gender-based violence and intimate relationship abuse. And this is essential to dismantle belief systems that enable and encourage that root cause of entitlement to power and control. And coercive control and abuse are really justified by those kind of social norms and expectations of what we see, of what it means to be a man. So we need to really reject the harmful messages that young men are taught about masculinity, which not only justify, sexism and abusive behaviors, but also severely harm young men and prevent them from living authentically. So it's essential to work with young people to empower them to critically examine harmful gender norms and stereotypes. And it's also not enough to say that you're one of the good guys. You need to actively be one of the good guys. And I'm very aware that, not all men are violent and not all men are abusive, but we need more men to be involved in this fight against gender-based violence, because it's as much a men's issue as it is a women's issue. And we really need men to reject the systems that oppress men and women, and to listen to the experiences of women, and to learn about the privileges that men are privy to. And, while these can be uncomfortable conversations and lessons, they are really essential to dismantling this issue. Finally, then, just keep an eye on the time. We're running very close, so I just wanted to highlight some stakeholder supports. So the male advice line offers support to men experiencing domestic violence. Childline can also be contacted for people who are under 18. And they have their helpline and their text line and chat line online. Bernardo's also offers support to young people who witness domestic abuse. Jigsaw is a national service for young people aged 12 to 25 who need support for emotional well-being and mental health. And we know that that can be one of the impacts of experiencing intimate relationship abuse. Belong To also offer support to young LGBTQ+ people. And Spun Out is just a great hub site of information that's available for young people. It has lots of resources, information on healthy relationships, consent, things like that. Then finally, sorry. I'll just quickly, just a moment. It's disappeared. So finally then, just to highlight the social media platforms that we have, and I'd really encourage you to follow them along so that you can follow the campaign and share the resources that we have there, because you'll never know who will need them. So we have a specific Twitter for 2IntoYou, it's @2IntoYou. Same with Instagram, it's @2IntoYou. And again, the website 2intoyou.ie. So we're almost at half, so I'm just going to see if there are any questions. Okay, so somebody who's working with a 17-year-old who's being emotionally coerced, abused, but she does not see it. How can I help her understand that she's in a toxic relationship? Yeah, so I suppose for young people, again, this abuse, this idea of abuse can feel like a really big word, but sometimes it can really help for young people to read other people's stories so that they can see themselves in it. So you could first of all tell her about the 2IntoYou website, and she can look through it herself in her own time. You could also encourage her to talk to her friends about how her partner treats her, because her friends might be able to tell her, that's not okay, that's not normal. But you can also tell her about survivor stories, and tell her about the stories that are on 2into.ie, and she might hopefully be able to connect with some of the experiences of survivors there, because sometimes it's helpful to see a perspective from outside ourselves, to give it some context and really shine a light on what's happening. So that seems to be everything. So thank you so much to everyone for joining today. I'll pop my email address in the chat box, and if anyone wants a 2into information pack, just send me an email and I'd be more than happy to send you out a pack, and I can also add you to the 2into mailing list, so you won't be bombarded with lots of emails. It's just a couple of emails throughout the year when our campaign is running, so when to share resources and when there'll be new supports available. And also we have some very exciting things coming up, like an engagement program that we're hoping to roll out directly with young people. So getting out in front of young people, teaching them about intimate relationship abuse, healthy and unhealthy relationships, things like that. So if you'd like to get involved, please do send me an email and I'd be more than happy to chat to you about it. But thank you so much for coming today. Thank you to Denise for her tech support. She's been absolutely amazing over the last week helping me out. And thank you so much also to Catherine for providing the ISL today. We'll be circulating the slides in the next few days, and the session is also recorded. So if you came in late, or if you think there's anyone who might be interested, it'll be sent around and you can forward it to them. So thank you so much and have a lovely afternoon.